Hi, my name is Marcus, and this is a companion podcast for the CG Jung-helpdesk meetup group. I host live events on Zoom every 2 weeks about the concepts and ideas of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. Every event I give a presentation about the Jungian concept, so have fun with this event's topic.
And I welcome you to today's very special topic of the inferior function, or the treasure of life, I also called it here. And it is a little bit of a niche topic. It's not an immediate big concept that people know of Jung, like alchemy or anima, animus, shadow, and so on. But it is really cool, and you can connect a lot of things of Jung with that. And first we start with the general idea of okay, what is a function? And especially the inferior function. And I have the quote from Jung here that says, "The inferior function contains the priceless treasure of life force. And therefore, it is so important to bring up. It is not for vulgar or criminal purposes, for the sake of its evil, that I try to bring out the swine or the criminal in people, whatever kindly critics may think." This is a little bit of a tough quote, at least to read out loud. But the idea here is clear. There's something that is incredibly valuable, but also it's associated with swine or criminal. And Jung brings it out in Patience, and the event will be about why does he do that and why is it like this? How can it be something incredibly negative, like the criminal people, the swine in people, but at the same time something that is a priceless treasure and associated with the life force. And Jung really talks a lot about functions. He uses a term really a lot. Most people know it more from mathematics or from programming. And Jung has many, many different functions that all serve a function. And it is always that there happens something in the psyche where it says, this is because of a certain function and how it works. It makes stuff happen in the psyche, in our experience and in our lives. And when he talks about functions, the orientating functions, he talks about the transcendent function. This is a kind of religious experience that people have when they reach the ends of their capabilities, that there's some divine interaction that brings out something new in them as a kind of a rebirth. And there's also the compensatory function where Jung says we have a kind of balance in our psyche, and the psyche tries to balance itself out constantly. So when we go too much in one direction, the other direction will come up. And also the relational function, which means how do we relate, for example, to other people? This is an interpersonal function. How do we interact with people? How do we experience them? And how does the relationship between us and the people surrounding us evolve? So you will encounter the term, when you read Jung, function very, very often. And today we will focus on the orientating functions. So what is an orientating function? For Jung says, the conscious psyche is an apparatus for adaptation and orientation and consists of a number of different psychic functions. Among those, we can distinguish 4 basic ones: sensation, thinking, feeling, intuition. So Jung sees consciousness as a constantly growing thing. It's very little when we're born, but it gets bigger and more proficient as we get older, as we learn more, as we adapt more. So consciousness is always there to solve a problem. There's something not working. It's not going according to our way. There's a problem in front of us. And what human beings can do incredibly well is to use consciousness, attention, will to overcome problems, to adapt to problems, to change themselves and their psyche to overcome something or make something possible. And he has these 4 functions of sensation, thinking, feeling, intuition, where he says these help us to orientate ourselves in the world, to understand, to get information into our consciousness. They're a little bit like when you have a city, there's many different ways how things can come into a city. They can come by plane, by car, by train, or by boat. they're all kind of unique. They all have advantages, disadvantages. You can do certain things with one way that you can't do with the others, but they're also all separated. One cannot be really the other. So they have these 4 distinct paths into your psyche. And he's saying psychological functions, like the sense functions, have their specific energy. You cannot dispose of feeling or of thinking or of any of the 4 functions. No one can say, I will not think. He will think inevitably. People cannot say, I will not feel. They will feel because the specific energy invested in each function expresses itself and cannot be exchanged for another. So what do those 4 functions mean, the 4 functions of orientation? We have sensation, which tells us what is present. This is a kind of awareness. We become aware of something through our sensation. For example, the environment around us, but also things in our body or things in our psyche. Our sensation just tells us, there is something. And to evaluate then what it is, we have thinking. Thinking tells us what something is, like, this is a couch. My stomach hurts. I just had a thought about this and that. And then does an evaluation happen? That's then feeling. How do I relate to it? This term is a little bit complicated in Jungian psychology and understanding because feeling has in colloquial terms, a different meaning. It's more associated with emotion, right? But Jung says it's really an evaluation. Do I like something or don't I like something? For example, this couch that I'm seeing and I just recognized, do I like it or don't I like it? This stomach hurt, do I like it or don't I like it? This is what it's meant with a kind of spectrum. Is it positive or negative? Always with me in relation to it. How do I feel about this? I feel about this very positively. I feel about this very negatively. And then we have intuition, because things are not only how we see them now, but they have a past and they have a future. It's not here in this exact moment because we are in the present, but this couch somehow came here and this couch will go somewhere. Ideally also with the stomach hurt, like, why does my stomach hurt? Maybe I ate something wrong. And then the question, like, will it go away? Maybe it will not go away. What will I do with this stomach ache? Will never go away. So this is how we process information, how we receive information, but also how we process it. And you can already see here before I showed a little compass, this wind rose. And when Jung looked at art from the East or in general, he would look out for mandalas because they also have these 4 parts, same as the 4 orientating functions, and saying, this is a kind of artistic representation of the functions and how they all work in harmony together. Because he's saying we have all these functions, we cannot prevent them from working. They're always there. We need them, we use them, and we have to bring them all into consciousness and all into our capacity. But this, of course, is not so easy. Otherwise, we would not need to talk about it. So he goes then a step further, and here becomes a little bit more technical. He groups those functions and he gives them roles, and I will explain why. But for the beginning, he says we have rational functions. Those are thinking and feeling, because we can kind of make an argumentation about it. Thinking, what is this? It could be this, it could be that. It's this. Feeling, how do I feel about this? I feel this about this because of this and that. So there's a kind of logic where you can string together thoughts, ideas, feelings in a logical manner, and you can also express it to someone else. And irrational functions are called irrational because there's not so much a structure to them. A sensation pops up suddenly out of nothing. Like when my stomach hurts, it did not hurt, suddenly it hurts. It's then for me to find out, what is a kind of logic behind that? But this is then with another function, just a recognition, like, something hurts. This is sensation. Similar with intuition. You cannot really know where an idea comes from. intuition can be a smart idea or like a bad idea, but it pops up like a lightning bolt. This also we have in our colloquial language. So this is the two groups: rational, thinking, feeling, and irrational, sensation, intuition. And then he says within the personality structure, those have specific roles. We have a superior function, which is kind of our favorite way. So we have all those four orientating functions, but we like one the most. Similar as we have two hands, and we like one hand the most. Like we do everything first with that hand. So he says this is where personality structure comes from. We have thinking people because they will always first try to approach things in a thinking way. Or we have intuitive people. They will always try to approach things in an intuitive way. But he says, similar as we have a favorite hand, we also have the other hand that we don't use so much and we're a little bit clumsy with it and not so proficient. And this he calls the inferior function. Inferior not meaning bad in that sense or like should be ignored. There will be a reason why it's called the inferior. But for the moment, it's just, okay, it's not paid attention to. And then there's something, it's called the auxiliary function, which is bridging the superior and the inferior functions. So this is for the development of personality, and this is also what this event will be about. So it's best to learn with some examples. So I brought some examples. What does it mean if somebody has a superior function for the different orientations? So what does it mean when somebody is a sensation type? So someone who is very grounded in reality. And Jung says those people, they are very much concerned about how things really are, how they experience them. And this is what they believe, and this is what they look out for. So they find meanings, for example, in a good dinner of physical attractions. They are very, very down to earth. And he would say, you find this then in people who are athletes or hunters or experimental scientists or empiricists, people who want to be somewhere directly and experience something directly. So when you have a superior function, very, very, very likely, this is your job, this is your career, this is how you garner a reputation. You're naturally proficient and inclined to do things a certain way. And there are jobs in society that require those skills. So this is where most people then gravitate towards. And he says sensation types with a superior function of sensation become then athletes, hunters, experimental scientists. And he used some examples from his time and earlier or later, where he says Ernst Mach, he was very famous physicist in regards to pressure. So the speed of sound that we use to say, for example, how fast a plane travels, Mach 1, 2, 3, and so on, that's from him. Or like Homer, the very famous writer from the Odyssey, where a new movie will come out this summer, he says, based on his writing, oh, he must be the sensation type because this is how he describes a lot of things in a very sensation, down-to-earth way. Like, how does it feel to be there? What are the sensations that come up? When we then move to the next one, like someone is a thinking person, so someone who relies heavily on their cognition, he says those are intellectuals. They draw conclusions. They think about stuff. So those are scientists, philosophers, truth seekers. And the examples he gives, for example, Charles Darwin, the person that came up with the theory of evolution, and Immanuel Kant, a very famous philosopher with a categorical imperative and very complex thinking, very, very interesting. But people who really applied their brain to understand something and figure something out. So when someone is in their feeling as a superior function, again, with this focus on subjective valuation, how do they think and feel about something? So they're drawn to emotion. Those are people then very much with tastes. So that would be painters, poets, artists. And interestingly enough, Jung says, those people are very often incredibly well adapted to situations that they're in and harmonize with those. And he says encountering those persons is very, very interesting because they have this ability to cool down a situation, like a conflict or something similar, because they are so firm and competent in their feeling, in their how do they relate to something, do they like something, don't they like something, and why, then they can also bring down others. And the examples that he's bringing is Goethe, the very famous multi-talent, German multi-talent, and also Sigmund Freud, so his colleague of the times, where he says, very good feeler, not so good thinker, this will come up later. But he says, they are very, very proficient in this feeling function. And that brings us to the last one, which is the function of possibilities, intuition. Those are the people that are not in the here and now. They are in the future. They are in possibilities, how things could be. They're not so much concerned how things really are. So they have a very good nose for like new opportunities, new ventures, connections. They have very good hunches, so they can guess incredibly well how something will turn out. And Jung sees there a lot of prophets, medicine men, visionaries, entrepreneurs, speculators. So people who think more in the future and how things are. And he names Nietzsche, for example. Nietzsche was living in the most peaceful time of Europe in hundreds and hundreds of years after the Napoleonic Wars and everything. And he says, there will be a great, great tragedy happening in Europe and people will kill each other in huge numbers. And he was right. He foresaw fascism, he foresaw communism, and he foresaw also the Great Wars. So for Jung, classical example for a highly, highly intuitive person. And he himself, Jung, also saw himself as an intuitive in his superior, in his main function. So now we bring it all together, these different terms, and I put it here all in the diagram. So what we see here is sensation and intuition grouped together as these irrational functions, and perpendicular to that, the thinking and feeling as the rational functions. So they form a kind of cross, like the windrose that we've seen before, like the mandala that we've seen before. And here would be the personality structure of a thinking person. So this thinking is in the superior side. The opposite in the same group, so for thinking it would be feeling, is on the inferior side. And the functions perpendicular to that could be the auxiliary function, which is a kind of helper function to bridge from one group into the other. Similar in opposition are sensation and intuition, and it forms this kind of cross. And we have an extra line going through it saying level of consciousness, because now it becomes fun. Now it becomes part of how our psyche works and how it's structured. So Jung says, yes, we have those four functions, but they are not necessarily available to us at any point in any degree of competence. So he says, when you have a thinking person, and that's their superior function, this one is very clear. That means they can use their function as a tool. Their thinking is applied in a willful manner, in a planned manner, and very, very stringent and very diligent and very easy to understand. And all these different things. This is how they can express themselves. And every time when there's a thinking problem, they can solve that very well because it's in their consciousness. But we have these other functions, and they can be a little bit more in the unconscious. They're below that level of consciousness. They go into the parts of the psyche that are not so available to us. And this is what he says. These functions, they're there, but it does not mean they're available to us. Especially the inferior function, especially the opposite of our superior function is deep, deep in the unconscious, which means it is not readily available to us. It means it's autonomous. It means that it's kind of mysterious to us. It's not available to us. That's not how we approach things. It's kind of also contradicting each other. Jung says it's very hard to think and feel at the same time. You can do the one or the other. And if you really like thinking, you won't do the feeling. So when you have scientists that come up with a new disease or the atom bomb, he says Yeah, well, those do a great job at thinking, but like the moral question about whether it should be done or not, how they feel about it, that's more on the back burner. So this is where he sees potential trouble. So then also for the auxiliary functions, those can be more or less conscious. They can be partly in consciousness, partly available, but not completely. So we will go here and have another setup of personality where we say, okay, above the level of consciousness is now only thinking. The rest is all unconscious. Sensation, intuition, feeling, all in the unconscious. That means this person can really only think, and everything else happens kind of unconsciously. In the background, the person is not aware, the person cannot control it. And what's also happening there, the things are not even clearly separated. He calls it undifferentiated, meaning even if that person would encounter their sensation, intuition, or feeling, likely it would be contaminated with the other functions at the same time. It would not be pure feeling coming out of the unconscious, but it would be tainted by sensation or intuition. It could be all three at the same time. So this is a very, let's say, difficult situation to be in. And he says this is how most people come to this world and develop, and also how most societies in the past worked, that people had a lower level of consciousness and less things available. And this is why we have now for like hundreds and thousands of years institutions to train people in certain cognitive functions in school, through rituals, through traditions, and all these different things. But yeah, this person would need to put in a lot of effort to really bring all their function into consciousness, to bring them under conscious control. In contrast to this person, which is a highly intuitive person, intuition as a superior function, the auxiliary function are also into consciousness, and it's only sensation as the opposite of intuition, being in the unconscious as the inferior function. And Jung says that's somehow always the case. You can really develop and put your mind onto things, but he says it's very, very hard to develop the inferior function. There's always this residue that you cannot really do anything with. It's similar when you have a plan, you have a rule, you have a structure, you clean your house. In the end, you always have a kind of box or place where you gather all the stuff that does not fit anywhere else. So you have a structure, everything works out nicely, but there's always this rest, there's always these exceptions that do not work. And Jung says that's the inferior function. There is this kind of stuff that's annoying that does not fit anywhere. And this is how he says how we treat this fourth function, the inferior function, in our personality. But this is also why we should really develop it. So this inferior function, how does it express itself? The opposite of the superior function. He says it's extremely simple and unsophisticated. Like the expression of this is very childlike. That means a thinking person, their feeling, very likely were very childlike, immature, not really thought through, can be a huge problem for that person and the people around them. Because it's in the unconscious, then autonomous. You don't have conscious control over it. When it comes out, it's hard to control. It's quite obsessive. Jung compares it even symbolically wise with animal or monster. And encountering that and touching that it's weird. It feels like an open wound or something that's painful to interact with. Similar with your other hand. If you do something with your other hand, it always feels wrong. It's like you're very clumsy, you're unsophisticated. This is why the hand is not used so much, and rather the other hand. And your good hands become better and better, and the other hand is just not paid attention to, so it becomes kind of worse and worse. So because it's in the unconscious, it's not available to our will. We cannot make conscious use of it. It does its own thing and appears out of nowhere in the dark like an animal. And inferior, that's very important to Jung, and he stresses that very often. Inferior does not mean it's weak. It's quite the opposite. He says it's overpowering. It's incredibly strong. It can really take people on leash and walk them around, and there's nothing really they can do. This is why he chose the picture of the tarot card of the devil, because there are two people on the leash, and it's really the devil who's in charge. And this is how it can feel like when the inferior function takes over. Also, they're very much trapped in the past. You're always like reminiscing about how things were and what happened there instead of looking to the future, because it's very much not something plannable, goal-driven, but it's like more than a mood that happens to you. This is also where people are incredibly sensitive. Jung said, when you have in therapy a feeling person that expresses themselves through feeling, it makes no sense to talk to them in a thinking manner. It will be very hard, it will be very awkward, and likely it will not work. Because people don't like to go there. Again, that's a hot iron they don't want to touch. It will also pop up in different places. Jung says it's very much projected, which means everything that's in the unconscious, we perceive outside. Because we're not able to perceive it on the inside, we perceive it on the outside. We see it in other persons. The thinker has very strong feelings about people around them and saying like, yeah, these people are like this and that, and they cause these feelings in me. And it's this kind of reactive talk, right? This kind of victim talk, like, oh, something is happening to me, and they say it's a fault of the other people, even though that it's happening inside their own psyche. And people also experience this in their own body, that when the inferior function comes up, that it feels like a vertigo, like the ground gives in, that there's no floor, people are falling because they feel so helpless in the situation. So people feel about it very dirty, they're shameful, and this is why it's repressed and unused. This is why people don't really interact with that, because it's, maybe they tried doing it with the other hand, everybody saw it, they failed, and it's like, okay, never again, I'm not doing it. And this is again Jung, he says, because it's so much in the unconscious, it's also kind of the access to our unconscious. So to also the collective part, the part where we are similar as the people before us and how people will be in the future. And this is then how it comes up for people, that there are some images that repeat themselves, some mythology, and it looks then very archaic. It's also experienced as something very, very archaic. And similar, as I did examples for the superior function, it's now a lot of fun to look how the inferior function looks like for the different types. So when you have a sensation type and the inferior function is intuition, Jung says those people are then very prone to, for example, superstitions, that they start believing magical threats and things that are not really real. They have fantasies that overpower them, and they are then in an anxiety state. Because like you believe in everything that's happening around you, but in the back of your mind, you start gathering up all these conspiracies and stuff that just might happen in the background and that you don't know about. And that might be then magic, it might be occult, it might be something very collective like global spanning and so on. Where he says, yeah, this is something normal that in sensation type should be aware of, that this will likely happen to them. Similarly, for a thinking type where the feeling is inferior, they will have moods that will come over them out of nowhere. And the resentfulness will be their very strong mood that happens, or sentimentality, feeling pity for oneself, of course. But to the outside, then being more mistrustful or petty and taking things very, very personal. So when people do not agree, it's seen as a personal attack. It's not seen then on this rational thinking level, but then rather on this deep feeling, personal level. And people are then very likely to attach their unconscious feelings, their evaluation of things, completely random and uncontrolled. Again, this is putting people on a leash. This is why I put here the picture of Wolfgang Pauli, who was a patient of Jung, very brilliant, famous physicist, won a Nobel Prize for particle physics. Particle physics has to do with quantum. So when the internet is not working anymore in a couple of years because of quantum computing and breaking all the encryptions, this is partly work of Wolfgang Pauli, and he was very famous as a patient of Jung because he, even though that he was a brilliant scientist, thinker, everything, he went into fights, to bars, he drank heavily, he visited prostitutes, he married a burlesque dancer, even though she was in love with another person. And yeah, so he was feeling-wise all over the place and entangled with a lot of stuff he should not be entangled with, but he could not control it really because this was a side he did not develop and could not develop on his own. This is why he went to Jung to say, okay, I have all these problems. I have short relationships. They all fall apart. I fall in love with random people on the street that I know nothing about. Like, Dr. Jung, what is happening with me? So in the body, this would also express itself through digestive problems, ulcers, and that especially during emotionally intense moments. Furthermore, inferior thinking and feeling types, and this is where Jung saw Freud. He said, Freud, brilliant man, but the thinking not so thorough. Could be also a little bit of beef between them, would make sense. Because the thinking is inferior and unsophisticated, they very much put the focus on nothing but interpretations, how Jung calls it. For example, Freud, he says, the psyche and motivation is nothing but sex. But you also have other people that say like, it's nothing but the patriarchy. It's nothing but sexism. It's nothing, and so on and so on. So it's a reduction of the world in complexity because it cannot be approached in a thorough thinking manner, in a very, very reduced manner. It's then very much also about like hair splitting, moralizing, and a very, very strong conviction of rules. So if you have formulate rules and you kind of think things through, it has to be incredibly simple rules. And arguing with those people does not work because that's the thinking way. And so Jung says the problem is their immovable convictions, that people hold an opinion that they don't actually come up with, but it happened to them through their unconscious, all on its own, but they still follow that completely without questioning it, without questioning themselves. So it's also associated with a constant brooding on the past, so not really letting go of that. But this is then where the thinking happens. In the past, the thinking all by itself. So for the last one, for the intuitive types who have on the inferior their sensation, because they overlook reality, they're stumbling over it. They're not in the here and now. So they're clumsy. They have accidents. They kind of ignore things around them. So they have struggles like with daily tasks. They have struggles with finances or needs of the body. And I have here example of Karl Marx, who famously did not have any money and was in debt in all his relatives and family, and also had very bad hygiene. So there was even like one point his mother wrote him a letter and said like, instead of writing about capital all the time, maybe you should try accumulate it for once. So nothing completely unusual. Steve Jobs as a person, as a visionary, was the same. Like Steve Jobs was convinced when you're a vegan or vegetarian, you cannot create body odor, even though that other people told him yes. And he washed his feet into toilet and so on. I mentioned that before in an event, and the person kind of took it personally that I talked badly about Steve Jobs. But that's how he was. Like, he was very strong in certain things and not so strong in other things. And it fits into this personality model of Jung. So because it's this autonomous, obsessive sensation, it's then also pleasure seeking, and it's compulsive, it's uncontrolled. And yeah, they're very much concerned about the body because the body is something very much here now. So hypochondriacs, so people afraid of having diseases, that fits very well into that. Having phobias or having like unexplainable bodily sensations because they cannot really control that. They cannot really approach that in a direct or conscious manner. So now it sounded like the inferior function is a very tough sell. It's like, oh my God, it sounds horrible. Why should I do that? Like, the superior function sounds so nice. I can make a career, I get reputation, all these things. And the inferior function, it feels like a hot iron and overpowers me and makes me do bad stuff. Why should I contend with that? And Jung has a very strong answer for that. He says the inferior function actually is life. And there's quotes describing that. If you leave all your energy and will in the superior function, you slowly go to hell. It sucks you dry. A very good, well-trained mind, it's a sterile field where nothing grows because it is finished. And also, the superior function is like fine old material, but a bit worn out, though highly differentiated, while the inferior function is very crude, a rough diamond, but full of promise. And this is Jung. Jung looks at the disagreeable, at the weak, at the unclear, at the scary things, and says, this is actually where the value is. This is where development is, because this is the rest of your psyche. You are a complete human being. And yes, you have a superior function, but the inferior function is also there. And if you do not take care of it, it will have all these negative consequences, whether you want it or not. And this is then what Jung is advocating for. He's saying you have to go there because like everything is there. The future is there, creativity is there, the unconscious is there. He says consciousness itself is not creative in a way. We receive creativity from the unconscious, from some other place. We can like formulate it and give it into form with consciousness, but the ideas, the symbols, if they're really true and creative and honest and real, they're coming from the unconscious, from the collective part of our psyche. So everything that's in consciousness, incredibly highly structured, working well, laser focused, highly organized. But at the same time, that's not all of life. You have all the other things. And if you focus only on this incredibly small slice of life, the psyche will always try to compensate and bring in all the other functions, and they will overwhelm you, try to make you aware of them. And this is why it says you need to willfully confront this. You have to willfully go to the dragon, fight the dragon, because behind the dragon is a treasure. This is life. This is development. This is growth of personality. This is to become yourself. Similar as when a child is born, it's not yet itself. It's its infancy. It does not yet have a clear personality. It's not developed yet and sophisticated in its way, how it approaches the world, how it understands itself. He says we are on a constant journey to become ourselves, to develop as we are. And this is individuation. And he says individuation is going directly into that. It's directly going into the dark and scary parts that are uncomfortable to us, because this is a part we don't look. In consciousness, we looked, everything is neatly organized, everything is there. So if something is missing, it has to be there because we already looked everywhere else. And the question then, of course, is how do you do that? Because it sounds very, very uncomfortable. And this is where Jung talks about the auxiliary function. He says, when you're in the rational function, so in thinking and feeling, you cannot go into thinking and feeling directly when this is on the inferior side. You have to go around sensation, or you have to go around intuition. So for example, for a thinking person, you could say, okay, like what do you feel in your body? Like what is the stuff that's happening there? And this can already give a hint, a kind of on the feeling. So this is what Jung talks about here. He says you cannot go directly to the inferior function from the superior. It must always be via the auxiliary function. It is as though the unconscious were in such antagonism to the superior function that it allowed no direct attacks. So we have to do it in a kind of roundabout way. And this is how Jung says how we develop our personality and our proficiency in those different functions. We do them one at a time. It's really a completely different worldview, similar as the people that we talked about with the different superior functions act and experience the world completely different. He says we have all those capacities to us. We have all those functions, but we have to shift our focus. We have to move away from the superior function and we have to go into another function. And that kind of turns the wheel, right? And suddenly something else gets more into the unconscious. But also the kind of inferior comes up. out of the unconscious. It becomes a little bit closer to consciousness. So it's really like a wheel turning in water. Part of it is underwater, but as you turn it, things emerge from it. So this is why he says, okay, you go through the auxiliary function to the inferior function. And he goes further into that with this quote. Usually, the process of individuation begins with a very decisive experience, namely, you fall down through your most differentiated function. You meet a situation you cannot handle. An intuitive will discover that he always overlooks a reality. He walks over it or stumbles upon it. And then he breaks his shin bone or gets ulcer of the stomach. And then must certainly, if his next auxiliary function is thinking, he will begin to think and ask himself, how is it? Why? So he makes the movement from intuition to thinking. This is, and Jung mentions individuation here again. Individuation means really you go through all the parts of the psyche. You go to all the functions. You learn those ways. You become proficient in them. To see the world differently, to experience it differently, to act in it differently. And this is a kind of defeat. Jung had this dream before he wrote down the text for the Red Book, where he dreamt of Siegfried, the hero of German mythology who killed the dragon. Like every culture has a killer of dragons, and the German culture has Siegfried. And he was in the water with his head cut open, like banged open. He was dead. And he saw that as, this is my superior function. This is like my heroic function. This is the thing that works best, that has the biggest achievements. But it got struck down. Like similar as in the myth of Siegfried, where Siegfried dies. He bathed in dragon blood, became immortal, but there was a small leaf on his back, and there he was not immortal, and this is where he died. A little bit like Achilles in the Greek mythology. So he says, every superior function has to die. We have to kind of die in the way how we approach the world with our favorite hand, because the world is more than that. It's many, many different ways. And we will suffer defeat, and we don't know what to do because we only know one way how to do it. And this is when individuation starts. This is when the journey starts into the psyche and to become proficient. And he says the next step is then into these auxiliary functions. When you are intuitive, it has to be thinking or feeling. It can't be sensation. But of course, Jung being Jung, he saw those patterns of the psyche in more places, codified. He says, when we have culture, when we have art, it's an expression of our psyche. It's expression how we work internally. There's a kind of feedback loop going on. We come up with certain ideas through the unconscious, and the things that speak to us also speak to our unconscious. So this is why he looked into many, many different places like fairy tales, spirituality, mythology, religion, because he says, there's something there that speaks to people, like huge groups of people. So it has to be something about how we work internally. And he looked really into alchemy, and he saw their alchemy really as a kind of precursor to psychology, without the people being aware of it. Their psyche also was projected into matter, into metals, into gases, into liquids. They described how they interacted with each other and what would happen if they would combine them, if they would burn them, and all these different things. And he said the way they describe it sounds very, very much like psychology. And similar as the inferior function, seen as something like lesser, not important, like, you can ignore it because it's uncomfortable. In alchemy, there's this concept of the philosopher's stone, the lapis philosophorum. That is the goal of the alchemist's work, of his opus. But very likely he encountered it already in the beginning of his journey, but he threw it away because he did not know the value. So this is what Jung talks about here. The stone is one that can be had vili pretio, cheaply, easily. It is found everywhere, in the streets, in dung, in toilets. So something not seemingly important. An alchemist held that people would sell it at a quite different price if they only knew its value. This stone, of course, is a cornerstone that was discarded by the builders. So the story of the stone that was discarded in the beginning, in the end becomes the cornerstone of the building being built, is something that he saw in alchemy, and where he saw the parallel in psychological understanding. And also in alchemy, there's this problem of 3 + 1. And Maria Prophetesia, an alchemist, talked about it. It says 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the 1 as a fourth. So the completion of the psyche, of personality, comes through the fourth. And that's always the problem. We have it very often in culture expressed in certain symbols, that the fourth has a special place. It's always different than the other 3. So in, for example, Christian mythology, we have the Holy Trinity, who is the Father, the Ghost, and the Holy Spirit. All very spiritual, airy, without a body, without form, and also very masculine. What is missing? The feminine is missing. The earthly is missing. The devil is missing. That's also part of the world. This is then the fourth, very much different from the other 3. Also in the 3 Musketeers, like how many Musketeers are in the 3 Musketeers? It's 4. The fourth one is D'Artagnan, who has to learn to become a Musketeer. And we have it also in our reality. We live in a 3-dimensional space, up, down, left, right, front, and back. But there's something more that makes it necessary for us to experience this, which is time as a fourth function. And it's very, very different from up and down, left and right, back and forth. So it's interesting how this problem comes up again and again on different places. And Jung says this is not a coincidence, because this is how our psyche is shaped, our personality is shaped, and also our development is shaped to become us, to become an individual, to become proficient in ourselves. And I would summarize the event from today saying that we are born with a certain typology of personality. We already have something like a favorite hand, a favorite function. And this is how we start. Similar as a card game, you first have some cards on your hand. And this is the beginning of the game. This is not the end. Like the game is a whole deck. The things that you don't know yet, the cards that are turned around, and that will come up with time, but only if you play the game. And having this hand of cards dealt in the beginning makes you very proficient at certain things, but also very weak in others, just out of necessities, because things contradict each other. And it's very easy to become one-sided, to focus only on one thing. And to become complete and whole, we need to go into the dark place. We have to go onto the other side, because this is where the development is, the treasure is, where life is, where experience is. This is where we have, let's say, joy again and fun and can taste things, where the things were, let's say, childlike and weak and not yet proficient. And Jung summarized it here in this quote. Getting up the fourth function and you can stand it, then you are cured. Because the fourth function brings up everything of which you are afraid. If you want to find the fourth function, go where you are most afraid. Follow your fear to find your destiny. And there you will find your fourth function. It is destiny. It is fate. It is real life. And I want to thank you for your time and attention.
This was this event's topic. Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in learning more about Jung, please check out the description.